Welcome to all of you, and I'd like you to welcome Kali Puri, who is the Group Editorial Director of Broadcast and New Media of the India Today Group. She is recognized for her vision to synergize India Today Group's conventional journalism with the innovations of the new media. Uh, Nicholas Carey is an American businessman, best known as the co-founder of Blockchain and a philanthropist. In 2015, Carey was named European Digital Leader of the Year by ICT Spring. Would you like to add to anything?
No, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. Advaita Kala is a writer and scriptwriter. She's written a book called Almost There.
Single.
Seems to be the story of India. But it's not, it's about a single woman, I believe. It's
Yes.
like the Indian Bridget Jones, all right. And two film scripts, Kahani and Anjana Anjani. She won the Zee Cine Award for the best story. I'm Madhu Trehan. I'm editor-in-chief of newslaundry.com, which was created actually to critique the news. And that is what we have been doing, but of late, what we find is that the challenge of critiquing news is not as important as raising the credibility of news, which is related to our subject today, which is false news. We are not going to call it fake news because Donald Trump has used that phrase, as you know, the two words, to legitimate news organizations or to anybody who has expressed views or written about him in a way that he doesn't like or he doesn't agree with. So we won't be using the word fake news, we will be using false news. We have to deal with pollution of all kinds, so he's polluted the word fake news. Today, I'll just give you a little bit of background on what has happened in the last elections in Ukraine, in the United States and France, which have really shown how serious fake news is. It isn't as light as the Pakistani UN representative showing a wrong picture in the as you all probably know, that she showed a picture of a Syrian girl when she said it was a girl from Kashmir with stone pellets in her face. Now, obviously somebody Googled it, found the picture, gave it to her, didn't research what the source of it, which is very easy to do, to source where the picture is originally from. More importantly, other than what in India we've been facing is images from different countries of slaughtered people claimed either to be of one community or the other, and presented in a way that it is in India in order to instigate riots. We saw that what happened in Bangalore when northeastern young people, there was an exodus because of fake news, false news, and a series of false news incidents have really colored the climate in a way that it sets communities against each other. It creates antagonism. A recent one was of in a hall, people are cheering, obviously Muslims cheering the Pakistani team, and it was presented as Muslims in India cheering the Pakistani team. And actually it was Pakistanis in Pakistan cheering the Pakistani team. So these kind of things we all know have created issues for us. But most importantly, what has happened is that now false news is affecting elections and therefore democracy. What happened in the United States, which incidentally just last week, September 25th, Mark Zuckerberg made statements, had to make a statement in which he admitted that Facebook was used as a platform by Russian operatives to influence the American election. And this started actually last year. In November, Obama was in Lima at a World Leaders Conference, Barack Obama, and he mentioned to Mark Zuckerberg that he suspected this was happening on the platform of Facebook. And Zuckerberg at that time reportedly dismissed it, saying, no, there's just a little bit, it doesn't mean anything. After a series of events, just to make a long story short for you, after a series of events, Zuckerberg and Facebook were forced to face the fact that it was far greater than just a little bit. So they traced it to the what is called native advertising in the West and what we call paid news, to posts that were put up and ads that were paid for, and they traced the ads to an agency called the Internet Research Agency, which is a troll army created by the Kremlin. So at that time, Obama had told Zuckerberg that this could affect future elections in any democratic country, and the United States has been affected. And although it was dismissed at that time, now Facebook has handed over 3,000 ads that were placed by the Internet Research Agency, which showed that these were placed in order to influence the election. Now, it is easy for Facebook to locate Islamic ISIS websites with that kind of information because the flag is out there and it is blatantly violent in its language and its presentation. But with these Russian operatives, it is far more difficult to detect because it is presented like any political advertising. Somebody who supports Trump puts an ad out. So they had a very difficult time zeroing in on this, but they have done it, and that was what Zuckerberg's statement was about. Also in 2014 in Ukraine, there was a massive false news, spreading of false news by Russia, which was proven by Ukrainians. And I would urge you to listen to the NPR podcast on this. It explains what the citizens of Ukraine did to try to fight the false news that Russia was spreading. And they actually set two communities against each other, the Russian-speaking part, the eastern part, which is Crimea, which Russia, as you all know, has annexed, and Ukraine. And they did this by creating false news. In fact, when journalists would arrive at a place, people would run away because they knew that the journalists had arrived to film an attack that was planned and was going to take place, which was only being created it was false news being acted out. That's how serious it is. So the Russians have developed an extremely sophisticated tool of propaganda, which they have used. And the question is now, which I will address to them, is will they use it again? Because in France, they were in the last election, Macron was able to counteract it because just weeks before the voting was to start, false information was dumped on websites, which showed that there was emails and so-called incriminating financial information. But the French Election Commission put out this information that do not listen to and do not forward and do not read these blocks of emails and documents that have been offloaded. In Germany, we didn't see that because I think by then it was the election commissions have been warned and they're more wary. So they will find a new way because nobody flies two planes into buildings twice. And right now what has happened with Facebook is like it's shutting the door, the barn door after the horse is left. So now we have to figure out exactly what is going to be the next method of hacking, of disturbing elections by spreading false news. And I would go straight to Nick first, because there have been many solutions proposed on the net, about how to combat it. And some of it is, one is of course educating people on how to detect false news, which Facebook has also put out ads, in fact, offline in Indian Express and Hindu on how to detect false news, because they are finding themselves in a corner. But since you're a techie, there have also been proposals for tech solutions, such as creating algorithms that would detect false websites, illegitimate websites, and false news. So could you tell us a little bit on how technology can help in detecting and destroying false news? Because just as, say, in the comment section, there are algorithms that detect obscenities and they're put aside right away. Can that be done for false news?
Yeah, so I think you've painted a very serious portrait of this issue and how complex it is. So it's worth noting that fake news is not false news, is not a new problem, and it's been in existence forever. You know, in the olden days, people used to talk about seeing witches and wizards, and used to scare people, and there, have been political motives to share propaganda, since the dawn of time. The trouble today, though, is that the technology platforms that are centralized, that we used to share and disseminate information, amplify all news, and the predatory ability of algorithms to actually target vulnerable people is significant. I think the biggest concern I have broadly is that it's very challenging to address some of these issues because the economic incentives on these platforms are not in alignment with necessarily bringing you truth. And so this is something that we have to discuss civilly because ultimately companies like Facebook and Twitter, they need your attention. The scarce resource in the attention economy is your time. And so you and us, we have to have a very serious dialogue about whether or not we really want truth as consumers anymore and whether or not we're really willing to pay for it. And so what I'm interested in is discovering potential technology solutions that actually align incentives to develop truth in our news sources. And I think there are some interesting ways of doing that, and I'll be happy to discuss them a little bit. But first, I think that question is whether or not there's an appetite from regular consumers for truth today is one I'd like to hear a little bit more from the panel on, because to me, unless we can prove that that's the case, we're going to be fighting a very challenging battle. Ultimately, these platforms, the internet basically made it possible for anybody to share anything. And so, there were thousands and thousands of websites and no one could really tell what was true anymore. And so now people are spending all their time looking at their friends and their community for some verification about what's true or not. And so they go to Facebook or Twitter. 62% of Americans are getting all of their news on these platforms. That's how much time they're spending online on Facebook and Twitter. So in short, I have some suggestions around the technologies, and I do want to talk about those. But the consequence of all this centralization that we've seen online is that it's very easy to spend this stuff out quickly. And so you need to use tools that are available to us to decentralize essentially risk. And that's one of the most interesting things that we can do with blockchain technology. And I will address that. But I think let's ask the question of whether or not there's an appetite for truth anymore, and then how potentially to create incentives for regular consumers to get to it.
I'll welcome Govind Itiraj, who's just joined us. He is one person on the panel who's actually active in combating fake, false news. We're using the term false news, not fake news, because of Trump. He's a print journalist and television, and founder of Ping Digital Broadcast, an online multinational network. He's also founder of indiaspend.com and factchecker.in, two public interest journalism website. Now, and Govind has been involved in exposing many fake stories on his websites. And first I want to thank him because he has come with high fever. So it's really kind of him to come, because I felt he's crucial to this discussion because he's actually on the job combating it. Now, Govind, I want to ask you that I see it as two motivations for producing fake news, false news. One is, of course, the political, to influence voters and elections, and the second is monetary, because as we've seen that people who propagate false news and don't have any particular political views are making a lot of money on their websites by propagating false stories. They're getting lots of ads because their false stories are juicy and they're viral, and so that is the second motivation. What do you think, besides what you're doing, what are the other methods we can use to expose false news?
Thank you, Madhu. My fever has nothing to do with my combating fake news, though the effort is quite a bit. So, I was speaking to a bunch of fairly senior managers at a very large consumer products company, who I can't mention, but you would surely know of them. And at the end of it, this was about a 1-hour chat on fake news. And because we were talking about, can fake news extend to products and services, and I do believe it will, and it is already, and what can companies do about it or brands do about it if they have to do anything. And at the end of it, this gentleman comes up to me and says, he says, do you know the one thing that stuck from everything that you said? I said, yeah, what is it? He says, this is my next startup. So I said, you mean something like what we do? He says, no. The startup is basically hiring 6 people, churning out fake news and going and selling it.
And he was proud of it?
I mean, I think he was half joking. So, but I think it sort of shines the light on where the problem is. So, just to take a step back, I think we know that WhatsApp today in India is about 230 million plus subscribers. It's a media platform on its own. It really doesn't matter whether stories make it to mainstream media, other media, television, print, online, and all that. If it's on WhatsApp, it's pretty much the truth. And it's
And
also
it's untraceable. WhatsApp is tough.
it's
to-
untraceable,
Yeah.
and you obviously tend to believe it because it comes from people you know who are friends, family members, and so on.
No, that's a very bad. Even
In
if
you-
it comes from friends and family, you do not believe it. You should not believe it.
I hope that would be the case, but it's usually not. So,
Okay.
so you half believe, sometimes you ignore, and I think there are 2 or 3 kinds of fake news. I think we must have, I'm assuming, discussed the political context or the current affairs context. There's a lot of fake news around, for instance, medicine, around healthcare, around history, around finance, and a lot of them are equally combustive in nature. You know, when someone puts out a WhatsApp forward saying Combiflam can kill you, and do not consume Combiflam. And so this we checked on Boom actually, which is our other fake news initiative. And we spoke to Sanofi, the company, we spoke to doctors and so on, and found that the problem that did happen was, and there was a problem, was that there was one batch of Combiflam that was weak in efficacy, so it did not work effectively. It surely did not kill anyone. But a lot of people actually believed it, and this just happened about a month ago. So here is, so here is something that's not necessarily in something that involves Gaurakshaks or, child kidnappers, as it happened in Jharkhand and 7 people were killed. But this is something that can have also some kind of impact on our daily consumption of products or services
No,
or
and
medicine.
affects companies because
Yeah.
you can bring down the value of a company
Yeah.
by spreading false news.
Yeah.
And I think a good response that I found to this kind of stuff that if you've got a cramp, hold your left arm up for 3 minutes and it'll go away. I think the answer to that is a lovely word that has been coined as Webakoof. So you believe that, you're a Webakoof. I'll have to translate that. There is an Bevkoof
Yeah,
means
yeah.
a fool.
Yeah.
So we've made it into Webakoof.
I'm going to write that down. I like that.
Yeah, which is also an extension of what the famous cyber psychologist Mary Eichen calls cyberchondria, right? Because we tend to search, and the point that you were making about how algorithms throw up stuff. If you search for headache on Google, the thing that you would most likely find is, let's say, the 6 or 7 sources of headache, of which about 2 will be fatal.
Yeah.
Saying that you're about to die because you've got a brain aneurysm or something even more dangerous than that. But it's not the reason you're seeing it is because most people click on that. Most people do not click on what could be the more benign version of what the headache could be. So I think we are in an amazing world, right? So we've got the supply of all of this information, advertent and inadvertent, because the inadvertent is really where people are just taking a punt on something they've heard and so on. The advertent, I'm sure we've already talked about. And all of us on the demand side, we tend to believe, we don't tend to believe, and as was pointed out earlier, what is the premium on truth? Are we trying to establish what the truth is in a particular case? And do we just believe because we like to believe? I think in the case of Trump, the post-Trump world, it's very clear that a lot of people believed that Hillary Clinton was a witch, or the Pope blessed Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he became. So people believed it. So there's nothing that you can do. All the fact checking you can do and the fake news busting will not change that. Or at least for most people.
Because the false news spreads faster, and the
Yeah.
correction or the fact that, although Facebook, we'll come to that later, Facebook has now put in some new method, technology where you can click on it to check the source, and also various companies and Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and Decoders of France in Le Monde, they're doing that. That you can that story will be labeled that it is inaccurate, and before you forward it, know that you're forwarding a false story. But the problem is that there is, especially in America, this tussle between what Zuckerberg and Twitter and Google face or don't want to and somehow are forced to deal with, is that they do not want to suppress or censor. Their freedom of speech is so important that that's why this pussyfooting around on this whole issue that Facebook did. Twitter doesn't even pretend. They don't even try to
Filter.
make anything truthful. They say whatever is on most of the time. And Google has had some effect in their ads, that they have removed ads from false news websites. Kali, you are running a large organization where the traffic of news is so high that the process of putting it out first, but checking whether it's true, is possibly the most probably hair-pulling job that anyone could have, because you're sitting on a tinderbox all the time. You don't know that some reporter could have picked up something believing it's true, not with an agenda, and puts it through as a story. How do you prevent that, and what are your experiences in where you've had to deal with this?
Okay, so I'd like to first begin by just appreciating News Laundry for changing its purpose in a way to build the credibility of media. I think that that's a very noble purpose. Nobody else is doing that for us, and we really are the favorite whipping boy of everyone. And really, fake news in the Trump sense is a new way of banning media by dictators, right? You discredit media is the same as banning media. Media then is under doubt, no one believes anything, and it no longer serves as an institution to help democracy and the democratic process. It can't bring power to account because it's now discredited. So thank you very much for doing that, because I don't think we have many people who are doing that for the media and, building its credibility. We find that people just nitpick on one small mistake and forget about all the good stuff that we do. Yes, there will be times when one particular news gets out for the reasons that you just said, where a reporter thinks it's true and, for whatever reason it gets out into the media circle. What it doesn't take into account is the number of times those fake news or planted news is foiled by a newsroom. So the couple of things that we do in the newsroom, and you're very right, the process at which we need to process news and verify it and stick it up there has just changed phenomenally. You've been part of the media process, so we've gone from fortnightly, verifying news for a fortnightly. You had the pleasure and the leisure to do it, to having to do it within seconds, and put it out. So we have a double verification process, which is called double RFA, ready for air. You have to get the news verified by two different sources. It could be a reporter and then another reporter, or the original source and the reporter. We have a fact check desk, which basically goes through stuff which doesn't sound right. But you worked in a newsroom, so one of the most important things in this, more than the fact checking and the double RFA, because two reporters could get it wrong, you could have maybe Googled stuff or looked at some facts which are wrong, right, is gut. So in the newsroom, one of the most important things is for the top management to have the nerve to hold on when news is breaking and say, no, he's not dead, he's not dead, he's not dead, though everyone else is saying he's dead, he's dead, he's dead, right?
Well, Jayalalitha was
Correct. And you have to hold on to your nerve, and at the same time, give a little bit of breathing room to reporters to know that you'll back them up. Because if you keep putting pressure on them, confirm it, and if you get it wrong, and if you're late, you've lost your job. So then that puts pressure on them to say, okay, I'm not 100%, but let me just say, yes, it's okay, let's go, right? So I think the newsroom has to have a nerve to hold on, and you've got to give breathing room to reporters so they know that you trust them and that you will allow them the time to verify it. So there will be times when you'll be 2 minutes late, but to us, being 2 minutes late is better than being wrong that one big time, right? And that's the decision we take. Having said that, of course, my pressure is always to reduce that 2 minute as much as possible, and then the effort is to get the news before everybody else. So you still have the 2 minute verification process, and you are still before everybody else. So, that's the process we follow. We have been a victim of false news where our brand has been used to make claims which are not correct. We have a political party whose social media team used our screens and our logo and basically copied the way we do our polls and made them win in a state. And they circulated this through WhatsApp. Now, it took us 2 minutes as well. We were like, has somebody screwed up? Because it looks so good, the photoshopping. But we knew this wasn't our poll. And then we basically, examined it closely and we realized it wasn't our font, at which point we realized this is false. And we started the correction process. But like Madhu said, it's very difficult to start correcting. It's much faster for them to spread the news and much harder to take it down. Plus with WhatsApp, because it's end-to-end encryption, you very rarely can find the source or the originator. With at least Facebook and Google, you have people to work with. With WhatsApp, even though it's owned by Facebook, you have no one that you can blame, so you're kind of stuck in that situation. But in this case, we were able to find the person because he had also put it on Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp, and we've sued them, saying, you can't do this, you're affecting our credibility by using our brand name. And so we also work with Google and Twitter, at least, and Facebook. All three of them do lots of extensive workshops, and we engage with them a lot, with our journalists regularly, to come and tell us what are the new tools. Because like you said, they're developing new tools all the time, but if your newsroom doesn't know it, it's no use. And a lot of the garage brands, small brands that are surfacing and putting out this kind of stuff don't know these tricks of the trade, right? So there are ways that we can catch them, and we have to stay up to date with the technology that is coming out. And that's, it's very time intensive, but it's required, and it's enforced in our newsroom that you have to attend the workshop. It's not optional.
Advaita, I'd like to take Nick's, I would say, option that he brought up. Do you think that people are actually interested in the truth? Don't they prefer to read something that they like, even if it's a lie?
Well, there's a study that's been done from the 1970s, and it's the concept and psychology of illusory truth, wherein if something is repeated often enough, even if it be a lie, it will take on the manifestation, or it will manifest as the truth and will be confirmed. Now, we live in an interesting time, when we speak of fake news or false news, and I'll pick up from Nick again, is really, if you look at it historically, it's been around forever. So I do agree with you. If you look at Octavian and Mark Antony, Octavian kind of disseminated fake news about Mark Antony, misinformation, and the final fight of the Republic of Rome, and won. And then went on to change his name to Augustus, and then floated a photograph, a young image of himself for the rest of his reign. If you look at American politics and the Russian connection, which we were talking about in 2016 and 2017, 1828, Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's people, there was a term then, I assume his propagandists, went ahead and spread the news that Quincy Adams, during his time as an ambassador in Russia, in Moscow, went ahead and offered a beautiful young woman to the Tsar at that time. So there was a Russian connection there. If you look at the Eurocentric colonial view of the world, and you look at what came before fake news, which was fake photographs. So you had Eurocentric brown sahibs here, but elsewhere in Europe, you had these little mock-up setups where you had them in the barren lands of Burma or in Egypt in front of the pyramids in Arab outfit, which were very authentic for that time. And there was a whole exhibition done of these images. And the real aim of that was communicating to the natives, or the home population, so to speak, the locals, was that, look, there's a whole world out there left to conquer. So it had its own colonial aspect. You look at the Nazis and their propaganda, which is very, very much spoken of. And you look at what they did about the persecution of the Jews and how they spread that. And then you look at the Americans who used Donald Duck. That was not meant to be a faux pas. That just came out that way. But Donald Duck, to kind of sell war bonds. So, when you say that fake news or false news is a recent phenomena, I contest that. So that's one part of it. Second is, of course, the psychological aspect of it. There is the aspect of illusory truth. There is the aspect of confirmation bias. There is the demographic of what we find on different profiles. Now, you look at an 18 to 24 profile is on Facebook. 24 up is on Twitter, on LinkedIn, which has more followers than Twitter. And then WhatsApp, of course, is the big daddy, which is, of course, end-to-end encryption. And that's really where I think the problem lies, because when it comes to Twitter, Facebook, you have, areas and checks and things where you can identify people who are indulging in this activity. But with WhatsApp, that's very, very difficult. But coming back to the demographic, the younger demographic, you find confirmation bias exists primarily in a demographic that is not exceptionally partisan. So when you're looking at an 18 to 24 demographic, which is not exceptionally politically partisan, they are in many ways much more susceptible to fake news than you are on Twitter, where people are already partisan for the most part, especially political Twitter, and where confirmation bias comes into play. So they're really seeking out information or news that confirms their political ideology, their worldview. And so it's a very different sort of need base. So when we talk about
what
how...
you're saying is that you're actually confirming what Nick suspects.
Right.
That people are not that interested in the truth.
Depending on the demographic. That's the
Well-
little nuance I offer on this.
Nick, what do you think needs to be addressed and looked at, and what can we do to raise awareness that looking for just confirmation of what you want to believe is damaging?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. So it may be important to introduce a little bit of an idea that we can use to potentially start to redevelop credibility when it comes to the information that we interact with. So for those of you that don't know what a blockchain is basically a distributed ledger, a big spreadsheet in the cloud that anyone can use to certify information. And the first implementation of a blockchain was used to create a form of digital money. And now there are lots of other applications for this. What's really important about it is that it's perfectly decentralized, it's open source, and it's highly resilient. It means that anyone can actually use these tools as essentially a type of utility for confirming that something has actually occurred. And so an application of this in the world of news or media could exist in some interesting ways. So let me propose a potential solution. And there are actually people working on these things. I know of 3 different startups that are focused on this today. But you can imagine a world where every time an author writes something, that piece of documentation, their work, gets posted into an immutable record-keeping system, essentially a database that can never be changed or forged. And so longitudinally, we start to get a little bit more credibility for people that are actually writing things in a truthful way. You could also then develop an algorithmic database that verifies facts. And so this would be known as something like a truth oracle, essentially a program that looks at a database of all information, and you could economically incentivize that with expert opinions and having the same type of fact-checking that journalists used to have the time to do. Now, this won't combat the speed at which false news can spread, but it would provide the ability to actually add like a veracity score to articles that you read in feeds and on social platforms. But it would require these social platforms to integrate this. And I think the big question mark to me is whether or not they would. Because if I'm writing a story that talks about global warming and it requires a lot of complexity to explain, that article probably won't get as many hits on it as what the latest fashion trends are this fall, and how to attract more people on your dating apps and all those things. And so if all these platforms make their money off of capturing more of your attention, there really isn't the economic incentive for those platforms to implement even a truthful record-keeping system. It can be built. We can design these things. You could log in to your Facebook feed, and on all the articles you could see a little score. And that score could be programmatically designed to evaluate truth. And there are economic incentives to doing that piece, but not necessarily for the platform to integrate it. And so the big question mark to me is whether or not we as a society choose to implement rules around that, or if we let markets basically decide. But I'm worried about these things to a certain extent because the business models are trying to chase advertising dollars, and those advertising dollars grow when people spend more time on the platform clicking on things that are seductive. We are living in a strange time where all of the AI isn't about creating more authentic, better relationships between us. It's about exercising your predispositions around whatever your interests are. So it's interested in getting you more addicted to the tools that you're using. So the issues are pretty complicated, but there is a world where you could implement blockchain technology, and the reason you would do it is because it has inherent decentralization. It has anyone can verify it, you can audit it, and you could have a record-keeping system to prove that something happened. Reporters could start to use these things to develop and reestablish some credibility longer term, and I think there is still an appetite, and I'd like to hope for an appetite around truthful documentation. But we would have to work with these platforms to implement these things, because right now the tools that are really available, they're sort of inconvenient. Like if you actually look at some of the systems that have been set up, I can flag a tweet for being inappropriate, or I can flag an article in Facebook and say this looks like it might not be true, but people are lazy. Like they're not really going to go through and do that at scale, and so unless you can programmatically do these things so that when an article is pushed, you're immediately applying a truthful score to it, I don't think consumers will have the ability to understand whether or not they're looking at a story that has some truth or not.
But
So-
can consumers individually use the blockchain to check on stories?
So what you could do is fund a project basically where consumers could be paid to do some of this fact checking, and that database would grow. This oracle of truth would be used by when authors, different media companies basically write stories, and they would reference the source material through that oracle. And then at least you would have this ability to score these articles for some degree of truth. Using prediction markets is a pretty compelling way of doing this. So there's a project called Augur on the Ethereum protocol that's doing this for studying like events. So like if I want to make a bet about the outcome of a political process or the next World Cup, I put some money onto the platform, and there's an arbiter. It's a software arbiter that basically holds that fund until the outcome occurs. And the outcome is verified by multiple parties that say that an outcome actually happened. So if you think about this in the context of news, if I'm reading the newspaper today and I read an article about they saw a piano fly out the window. Well, I might go, that's totally ridiculous. But if 2 or 3 people independently that wouldn't otherwise have known each other verify that in fact a piano flew out the window and it wasn't an elephant, then I have a higher degree of confidence in that piece of truth. And you could do the same thing with this Oracle system, and there's a company working on that today. Now, their model is first to do it for sort of this prediction of future events, but it also applies to things that have already happened, because once you have the economic incentive to essentially coordinate truth, you could use it in publishing media articles. But like I said, the question to me is not whether or not we can do this. It's definitely technically possible, and you can align the incentives to create a truth engine. The question I have is whether or not consumers will use it.
Can I take that? I think there's hope, and I think that consumers do want the truth. If the consumers didn't want the truth, you wouldn't have big traditional brands who go out and do the painstaking process of verifying stories surviving. What we find is that maybe on a low news day, right, or in a salacious story, your traffic and your viewership may be equal to some of the other more kind of garage brands who are like, maybe making it even exaggerating it. But on a big news story which affects them, right, let's say budget, demonetization, GST, terror attack, our traffic and viewership is through the roof. So it means that on important issues, people do want the truth, and they are coming to brands that they trust. So I think that that's a very good sign. And I think one of the things we need to do as a media companies is engage with the platforms, because they're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. The Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world, and say to them, look, you've got to work with us to make your platform more credible, because otherwise you're playing a short-term game for monetization. It won't be a platform that lasts beyond a point. And you have to make some differentiation between authenticated brands and those that are not. So maybe in the monetization, there's a difference, or the way they verify us is slightly different, and they encourage those brands. So I think we need to engage with them more, and we need to flood those mediums with more of the credible news, than allow the brands who are not following this process to take it away. I think consumers want the truth.
Govind, what do you think?
Yeah, I think.
And could you also address 2 points?
Yeah.
One is whether people really want the truth or not, and two, the methods you have used to unearth fake news, and as compared to what, not compared to, but connected to what Nick talked about.
Right. I think there are two parallel worlds. I think there is the world which Kali talked about, where people will come to the big brand, media brand established, because they know that there is a process of verification, there is credibility at stake, and therefore largely you would get the truth or an attempt at the truth. I think the problem that we are facing here as we speak about it is the parallel world, where a lot of things happen which have really nothing to do, and people who put it out really don't care about what it does and what is the outcome it has. Let me give you one or two examples. When GST was being rolled out, there was a WhatsApp forward which was going around which said that if you were to, if you pay your utility bills using a credit card, there will be a double GST impact. Okay, this was a WhatsApp forward. It did. I'm assuming, I don't know for a fact, that a lot of my colleagues or friends in mainstream media, like in financial newspapers or TV stations, saw it but ignored it, which is perhaps what we would have done, or is the natural reaction. But turned out that forward was, it acquired such velocity, and as I've argued in the past, the velocity creates the veracity, that the finance secretary by evening had to issue a statement saying that this is not true. And similarly, there were a couple of other instances under GST where the government had to issue statements to content or information which was never in the media domain. It was only in this domain. So I think that's a peculiar problem which we have to figure out how to address. The other is really, fear. So let me give you another example. We've talked about it earlier as well. About a month and a half ago, there was a video doing the rounds. There was this guy standing in front of a TV monitor which showed the financials of 9 public sector banks, right? So he said that these banks are under stress, Indian public sector banks. These banks are under stress, it's true. These banks are under Reserve Bank of India, the central bank's watch, which is true. This is their stressed asset position, which is true. This is what could happen to their profitability numbers or their bottom line, which was also true. And then he concluded that I would suggest that if you have an account in any of these banks, United Bank of India, UCO Bank, and there were other banks, you should go right now to your branch, close your account, and take out your money. Right? So now and I saw that, and the thing is, I've been a financial journalist for more than 20 years, and the confidence with which it was said actually shook me, because I almost believed it. But then I started thinking, and I said, but it's never happened that a commercial or a scheduled commercial bank in this country has been shut down or has been exposed to a run from depositors. So we did a fact check, we called up the Reserve Bank, we did all of that. But the thing is, and I know a lot of people who saw that video and actually believed it. And I know most people here would almost believe it, because the thing is, there is 60% fact or 70% fact and 30% interpretation. And that's the kind of fake news that worries me the most. Because I know mainstream media cannot, that's the nature of mainstream media, is not going to make it its want to sit down every morning and say, okay, now what's coming out that I can actually debunk or fact check. It's not built for that. You're built to say that, okay, here is what's happened and let me go report it accurately and so on. So similarly, I gave you the example of CombiFlam, and there are many examples in the broad in the broad category of healthcare. History, people twist history. People said, okay, there's another one that's going on which we are still researching because it's so cleverly done, saying that the Red Fort was built by a Hindu king, right? So the thing is, and the piece, that if you see the quality of the writing, it's quite good, because except for a few areas where he's evidently whoever the author is has played with fact. It's the the interpretation, the flow of thought is of a very high quality. So how do you get back at that? And the thing is, if you see, something like this has the potential to be communally divisive. It has the potential to create trouble if it's spun out further. So I think this is the nature of the beast that we are talking about, and I think it requires a very different approach. I know that Google and Facebook are doing a lot. Facebook finally had to admit that they're going to hire 3,000 people who will watch stuff, because they know that this is not something that they could algorithmically respond. They cannot respond with technology. Google, to the point that, is it all looking very dim and desolate? Maybe not, because the fact is, the reason Google has started responding and tightening the screw, so to speak, is because advertisers are pulling out. post-Trump, almost all big advertisers, particularly on YouTube, started pulling out and saying that, we are not going to advertise on a platform where we don't know where our pre-rolls or our ads are going to play or alongside what. And that had a huge impact on yields on YouTube and revenues. So, and the thing is, finally, Google, depending on how you define it, is either a technology company or an advertising company, or Facebook too. So if advertisers are putting pressure, because advertisers surely want to be their brands, whether it's Procter & Gamble or Unilever, want their products or services to be seen alongside the truth. I think that's, to me, is where the real pressure is coming from. And if today Google and Facebook are responding and doing things and putting out full page ads, is because advertisers are putting pressure. Whether consumers are wanting to believe the truth or happy with the alternative truth or whichever version of truth that they get, I don't know. And clearly it appears that they like what they like. But if there's any hope for me, I mean, whether it's going to be the technology solution or not, it's really going to be what advertisers are saying, combined with the people, the real people that the big technology platforms are putting on ground or in their offices to actually track this problem in a real-time basis and make sense of it, not depend on a bot or an algorithm to actually figure out.
Advaita, what do you think in terms of, do you think that the various things that have been created in many countries to combat false news would in any way be successful? And what Govind is saying is that people are choosing what they want to, and Nick has also said the same thing. We have technology, we have people making money off false news. There seems to be a much smaller group who are, well, in terms of the consumers of false news are larger than the people who are trying to combat it. So what do you see as the future? I mean, I don't want you to predict, but I'm saying that what is the path?
I think part of it is just going to be media literacy as well, especially when it comes to younger people.
And that's a slower process.
That's a slower process, but it's actually behavioral change. You have to also remember, Govind brought up advertising many times, and I kind of think of that as a sort of a grooming process, especially in our modern age. We've been groomed and fed on advertising, which already convinced us of products and benefits from those products, which were not entirely true. So in terms of our mental acceptance of fake news, so to speak, or news that confirms a certain bias or presents the facts in a way that makes sense of the world to us, has already kind of laid the mental framework with that. So when I think of advertising in that sense, it hasn't always been, or it isn't necessarily honest. I think there will be a need for behavioral change. I'm intrigued with the way people combat fake news or false news. I mean, a lot of people go through, we've seen this with reviews, especially, film reviews, to go back a little bit into my line of work. There was a time when a film reviewer could make or break your film, and that was the end of it. If you got a certain number of stars from a particular reviewer, that was it. But today you have peer review systems, you have systems of review from people that you know, that you like, that you trust. I think the news is going to be reviewed. I think it already is being reviewed. We've seen, Kali touched on that. I think credibility is a huge issue with old media. I call it old media vis-a-vis new media. I think because of that credibility issue, you're going to have a peer review system when it comes to the news, and people are going to evaluate the news in terms of the biases that they see, be it the reporters, the anchors, even the media house, and will accordingly accept or reject news. It's already happening. So I think that is really something that you can't really turn the clock back on unless the whole way of delivering news changes.
But also this word bias that you brought up, that's become another word like fake news. So
Sure.
if you don't agree with the article,
Yeah.
you call it biased.
Or you call it fake news.
That's even worse. So we're running out of time. I have to open up the floor to questions. If you want to address it to anyone, please go ahead.
I would like to hear from the panel addressing some larger institutional issues which exist in the whole media world. That we've assumed that the large business media houses have a process and the news will be correct. I would like to challenge that myth that most of the Indian business media houses are getting owned increasingly by larger corporate houses which actually have no reason to own them other than using a larger clout for their business interest while negotiating with the bureaucracy or the political class. So I think that ownership and the funding of the big media houses and the institutional cleanup, that's one. And second is at a individual level, everybody in the society and the individuals know that even in these large business media houses, there are individual journalists at all levels who are corrupted, and we don't see enough scoop or sting operations on them and clean up on them as to what are they doing. They are like a pawns played by the one business house against the other to go after them for money. And that cleanup and that exposure is not out in the open. So these two, institutional level cleanup and these individuals who are widely there in all business houses, used for corrupt money for others, you know. So those two issues are not enough debated or discussed. It seems there's a good understanding between all media houses that let's not expose this issue. There's not enough dialogue in public domain.
Well, also the point is that not enough is known of how many journalists are fired for their dishonesty. All right, not enough is known. I don't think it's necessary. That's my personal view. That when a journalist takes a stand in a news organization that tells him to go and get paid news, and a journalist says, "I won't do it," that is not publicized. All right. So there's a lot of good journalists, and a lot of good journalists who've taken a stand. Many who have been fired for writing an article, on editors who have been taken a stand because when a story has been done which is a negative about the government, and the government has had that person fired. All right, none of that is so. All of the public is after journalists that they're all corrupt and they're all into blackmail and there's paid news. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of good journalism going on. There's a lot of exposés going on, and all the scams that have happened in the past would not have been exposed unless there was good journalism going on. So I think I have to defend this profession, which has been particularly targeted in a way that the credibility is damaged. So when we do exposés, there are enough of trolls who can damage the credibility of that news organization because it doesn't suit anybody in power. And I'm not talking about this government, I'm talking about all previous governments included. So that is a problem, and you have to give us the credit that there have been some extremely good exposés on business, on even on journalism, in all fields. So please do not think in only these terms that there are only dishonest journalists. There are a huge amount of honest.
Good also, but we need to discuss the bad as well.
No, I mean, there'll be bad fish in every pond, right? But the fact is, how much does the bad fish survive? Now, you look at the vanity channels, the fight that you're talking about, two businessmen, you know where their channels are right now. So it's also that people realize it. They may take enjoyment in the fight that two business people are fighting, but the channels are then not looked at with certain credibility, and they don't get that kind of premium from advertisers because they're not seen as credible channels. Now, I want to make a point here, right? You raised a very important point that, okay, channels and media houses are being bought by business houses. I think financial independence for media is very, very important. You should be able to be financially independent, have enough reserves so you can stand up to the powers that be, whether it's government or whether it's a big business house, right? But at the same time, if we do things which may get us business, which you think are not right, which don't have enough gravitas or salacious, we're killed for that as well. So really, for a media house, you are hit from this side and from that side. So it's a very tightrope balance, and we do walk it, right? Where you do need to do certain things which may be not, full of gravitas. They may be a little bit more entertaining stories for a news channel, right? To maintain the viewership, because that's maybe what the audience wants, and at the same time do the gravitas and the real stories which is required. It is a tightrope balance, and we have to walk that. Because if you don't make it a business, then you're not financially independent. If you're not financially independent, you can't do the job of a credible media house.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nidhi. I'm a global shaper from Ahmedabad Hub. Why can't WhatsApp be, is there not a policy lobbying to make WhatsApp more accountable for, if Facebook and Google can make sure who
अरे भैया एक ही जगह है जहाँ हम phone call में बात कर सकते हैं which the government is not watching us.
No,
Please
not
don't ask us
phone
such
call.
things.
Not phone call. I mean the original source, not tracing the conversations, but the original source. If we can figure out who's circulated the first message on Facebook, why can't that happen on WhatsApp as well?
Because you're not a registered user, right? You're just a telephone number. You could be anyone. You could create a telephone, get a number, WhatsApp, and throw the telephone in the dustbin.
But just remember which number. That's it.
No, but how
It could be a fake,
it's
it could be
broad-
just a temporary number. But the thing is that there is one thing citizens can do, and I think the panelists should, Govind, please come, because I know you're on the subject. You can reverse send. When somebody sends you something which you know is false news about some facts or people you know, you have to reverse send and say, this is not true. Kindly further reverse send it and say that this is not true. So if we start a culture of reverse sending and correcting it, even on WhatsApp, I think it'll work. Govind, please.
No, there was some talk about the government trying to or wanting to penalize the administrators of certain WhatsApp groups, particularly if that group has.
That was passed. That was a rule that was
So
passed.
no, what I'm saying is, I think the issue is not technology, right? The issue is the intent. I think WhatsApp as a company has been extremely, let's say, I don't know if indifferent is or reticent about changing things. I think if they decided that we want to make the whole process or the supply chain more visible to people on both sides, and make sure that they if someone circulates something, there is a clear identification and all that, they can do it. I don't think the technology is a problem at all. Yeah. So, and that goes for every platform, right? So whether you use pure technology, whether you use technology plus people like Facebook has, I think any of these guys can do it. But WhatsApp specifically has been a very reticent company, even though it's part of Facebook. And I think it's about whether they change and to what extent they're willing to change. And they could. It's not like they can't.
It can be a security threat because other companies can. That's what
Yeah.
I was asking.
No, I mean, like Google, I'm saying life can fundamentally change. I mean, it's not, these are all young companies. For them to do a tech or a coding shift to say that, okay, this is what I want to make visible and this is what I want to put out is very simple. And it may just happen not because of what we are discussing here, because something really dramatic and unfortunate happens somewhere
or
else.
it's profitable for them to do.
Yeah, or
That
it's
is always
profitable.
the
But
great
someone may
motivation.
come in with
Yes.
the same-
Yeah,
I
but
will
the
see
thing,
offers.
yeah,
That
but the
is-
thing is,
that's the
someone else may
thing.
come
Yeah.
up with another
But the
platform.
same thing,
Yeah.
so it'll negate that.
Okay, my question is actually Kali and Govind might be able to answer this. When you talk about advertisers being the primary pressure coming from them for news to change its behavior, or even for platforms, in case of Breitbart, or when there were a whole series of sexual assault allegations against Fox News professionals, a whole bunch of advertisers pulled out, which made them fire someone or change how they present the news. In India, our advertisers, do they really give a damn? Because I am aware of news channels that have run blatantly false stories, demonizing a community. If I could take names, Z and Republic do it all the time. But it hasn't hit them. Like Microsoft is a founder, sponsor of Republic. But I don't see them pulling out, whereas they'd be a lot more sensitive in the West. Is there there is no, you're not conscious about your image, brand image in India. Is that a factor? And sorry, one quick question. This is, I watched this film called Bitcoin, Betting on Bitcoin. And it spoke about this one huge company, which was one of the early adopters of Bitcoin, which was acting as an exchange, which went bankrupt, and the founder was arrested in Japan. If Bitcoin is so secure, how did $500 million of Bitcoin vanish? I didn't understand that.
I'll answer that really quickly because we're here to talk about media. What happened, though, was a centralized entity collected a lot of value. And it's actually relevant to point this out because when that happens, you increase the incentives to breach that system or abuse the system. This is actually relevant to the media conversation, though, because as you have large centralized media firms that are disseminating news and information, there's a lot of centralized risk because they can get abused and they can get compromised. And so the reality is that most technology platforms today are all designed that way. They centralize tons of information about people. It's all siloed into digital honeypots. And as they grow, more and more risk gets centralized. And I am deeply concerned about that because as we're seeing week after week, more of these services are getting broken into. And that's because if you have a lot of valuable information, it's valuable not just to the company, but to external threats as well. And so One of the ways to de-risk that is to decentralize it and split the information out and store it in lots of different places. And that's how a blockchain functions. So the problem that occurred in that specific scenario was it's the firm that was formed in Japan basically took a system whose entire purpose was to decentralize risk and built something centralized on top of it, which is really, really foolish. On the
Govind?
other questions,
So I think we're giving advertiser too much credit. I agree with you. I mean, most advertisers don't take that call. They just care about the viewership, right? The hope is, and it has happened, that over time viewers don't watch that channel because it doesn't have credibility, and as a result the numbers fall, and so the advertisers don't come in. I mean, that's the long-term story. The problem that we're facing now, and many of the journalists who I speak to who have worked in the newsrooms for like 30 years, they say they've never seen a polarized environment such as this, right? So you're having a situation where channels, even if they're putting out news which is not credible, are getting viewership because there's a confirmation bias. You're seeing that guy and he's saying something that you believe in, and you're like, yes, yes, yes. So they're watching the channel and it is getting the viewership. So this is a worrying trend, right? That you are putting out opinion masqueraded as facts and you're getting away with it, right? And people are watching you. I think from the experience that I have heard about in our newsroom, and our newsroom is about 40 years old, 42 years old, is that this is not a long-term game. And eventually, you know, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool everyone all the time. So eventually it does, but it does mean painful times for people who are trying to do credible news. And you just have to basically, you know, wait it out.
I think we are at still the early phase of this cycle in India. Advertisers in general are careful about their brand and their brand and their service and positioning. In India, vis-a-vis television stations, maybe they've not still started looking at what could be the fallout or the negative impact of my brand being seen along a highly polarized program. But my sense is it will happen, because even if consumers don't say, other television stations will surely will point it out, and salespeople will point it out. And I think that's an important thing. Advertisers should be clear where their product is being placed, what is the kind of programming that they are being seen alongside, and what is the kind of message that they're involved with. I think it's new in this country, and my sense is that it will start happening slowly, but it will surely start happening.
So I'm being told that I have to wind up. I'm sorry. We're out of time. Just to give you a quick roundup of what takeaway you can have. Basically, what we're looking at is Nick is looking at technological solutions, and as Advaita said, and Govind and Kali particularly has said that consumers have to be more aware of what they're reading. I do urge you to go on Google and and look at the clues, because there's no time, but I could read them out to you. But there are about 10 ways where you can figure out how to check whether this is a credible source, whether it is false news or not. So I would urge you to do that. Govind has given us a couple of perspectives on the way forward and exactly on how they're doing it. Advaita's, I think her synopsis of past history as related to today was, of course, highly entertaining, and it's good to know that they were doing it in Shakespeare's time also. Propaganda and false news is not very reassuring, but Nick, I think a large part of it is that we are looking towards technology more than ever to fix this kind of issue, because it seems that what Advaita was saying is that there is a confirmation bias where people do want to just read even if it's lies. But I think what I started the session with in discussing how false news has impacted the American election, and how has actually, which came out with an extremely shocking outcome. Large part now, as the postmortems are being done, we are seeing that it was influenced hugely by the social media and false news, and now there's an investigation going on whether it was coming from Russia, although Facebook has confirmed that it was. So there, in India, have we reached a critical mass for this kind of thing to affect future elections? I think so. I think it's a real danger. I think we have to be aware of it, and we have to put things in place before. In fact, state elections coming up, I think we It is our job as journalists, as fact checkers, even somebody like Nick, to to push forward this agenda for truth. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.